Hey everyone, welcome back to Aura Fiction. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry ran away to Italy at age 7 and was adopted by the Volturi as their most powerful immortal prince? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1: The Boy on the Stones. The summer Harry Potter turned 7, the Dursleys forgot to feed him for 4 days. It wasn't deliberate exactly. Vernon had gotten a promotion and taken the family to Brighton to celebrate, and somewhere between packing Dudley's enormous suitcase and arguing about which hotel had the better pool, nobody remembered to leave food or a key. They came back to find the cupboard padlock undamaged and assumed Harry had been fine, because it was easier to assume that, and the boy never said anything anyway. Harry had not been fine. He drunk water from the bathroom tap for 3 days, curled on the thin mattress in the dark, listening to the pipes groan and the house settle around him. The hunger had moved past pain somewhere on day 2 and become something stranger, a hollow, luminous feeling that made the edges of things look soft and bright. By day 4 he was halfway to delirious, and the magic which had always lived in his chest like a banked coal was burning in a way it never had before. He'd broken out of the cupboard on the second day. The padlock had simply opened when he touched it, which would have frightened him if he'd had the energy for fright. He'd eaten what he could find: crackers from the back of the pantry, a bruised apple that had rolled behind the fruit bowl, 2 handfuls of dry cereal straight from the box, and then he'd gone back inside, because leaving felt more dangerous than staying. Vernon's hands were large. Harry knew what they felt like, but on day 4 something shifted. He was sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, watching dust motes drift through the shaft of late afternoon light that came through the window above the sink, when it occurred to him quite calmly, quite clearly, with the lucid simplicity of a child who has run out of the ability to be afraid, that nobody was coming. Not today, not tomorrow. Not ever, not in the way that mattered. The magic responded to that thought like a struck bell. Harry didn't feel himself stand up. He didn't feel himself walk to the back door, or feel his hand turn the handle, or feel his bare feet on the hot garden path. What he felt was the burning in his chest ignite all at once into something enormous, a fire that had been waiting 7 years for someone to stop smothering it. And then he was moving, and the world was moving with him, the terraced houses of Privet Drive stretching and blurring like a photograph left in the rain, and the English sky going green at the edges, and Harry Potter was gone. Volterra in July was golden. The city climbed its hill in layers of amber, stone, and terracotta, the kind of place that looked like it had been painted rather than built, every piazza and archway worn smooth by centuries of hands and weather. Tourists moved through the streets in the late afternoon, eating gelato, taking photographs, arguing in 4 languages about where to find dinner. The shops were shutting for the evening. The light was thick and warm and entirely beautiful. Harry appeared in the Piazza dei Priori at 23 minutes past 6. He did not arrive gracefully. He hit the cobblestones hard on his hands and knees, the impact jarring up his arms and into his shoulders, and for a moment he just stayed there, breathing. The cobblestones were warm from the day's sun and rough under his palms. He could smell bread from somewhere, and coffee, and something floral he didn't have a name for. It was nothing like Surrey. He sat back on his heels and looked up. The piazza was large and very old, ringed by stone buildings with heavy medieval faces, a clock tower rising against a sky that had started going pink at the horizon. People were staring. A woman with a pushchair had stopped a few meters away, looking at him with the expression people reserved for things that had appeared where they shouldn't be, not frightened yet, just confused, cataloging the wrongness of it. Harry registered none of this for approximately 4 seconds, and then his body reminded him very firmly that he had eaten almost nothing in 4 days, and the world tilted sideways, and he caught himself on one hand before he could fall. "Interesting," said a voice. It came from his left. Harry turned his head slowly, because turning it quickly felt ambitious, and found a man standing at the edge of the piazza watching him. The word man was technically accurate but somehow insufficient. He was pale, not ill-pale but stone-pale, the kind of pallor that suggested the absence of something rather than the presence of sickness. His hair was dark and his eyes were red, which Harry's fever-bright mind registered as wrong but didn't have the resources to process. He was dressed in clothes that were expensive and slightly off, like someone who had learned what modern fashion looked like from a description rather than experience. He stood very still in the way that most people couldn't, not the stillness of someone trying not to move but the stillness of something that simply was still, the way a statue is still. He was looking at Harry the way Harry had once watched a puzzle that had turned out to be harder than the box suggested, with focused, delighted attention. "Hello," Harry said, because he was 7 and had been raised on Petunia Dursley's insistence on manners regardless of circumstances, and then he passed out. He woke up on something soft. This was so unusual that it brought him back to consciousness faster than anything else could have. Soft things were for Dudley. Harry's experience of sleep surfaces ran to thin mattresses with broken springs, the back seat of Vernon's car on the one occasion he'd been allowed in it, and once, memorably, a patch of garden during a hot August when he'd been locked outside overnight. Whatever he was lying on now had been selected by someone who understood that human bodies required support, and the novelty of it was almost overwhelming. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was vaulted stone, very old, lit by candelabras that held real candles, dozens of them, so the light was warm and alive. The walls were hung with tapestries in deep reds and golds. The bed he was in was enormous, piled with blankets that cost more than everything in the Dursley house combined, and someone had covered him with them, and next to the bed on a small table was a glass of water and a plate. The plate held bread, real bread with a dark crust still slightly warm, a small bowl of olive oil, a slice of some kind of dense yellow cake, an orange. Harry sat up carefully, watching the room for movement, and when nothing moved, he drank the entire glass of water in one go and ate the bread without putting it down. He was working on the orange, which he was approaching strategically, trying to make last, when the door opened and the pale man came in. Up close in the candlelight, the redness of his eyes was unmistakable. Harry looked at them, looked at the man's face, and kept peeling the orange, because hunger was a more immediate problem than the fact that something was clearly wrong with this person's biology. The man stopped when he saw Harry eating, and his expression did something complicated and briefly warm. "You have a very pragmatic sense of priorities," he said. His English was perfect but musical, like someone who had learned it from books and refined it over a very long time. "Most children who wake in unfamiliar rooms scream. Does screaming help?" Harry asked. "Rarely." "Then it's a waste of time," Harry said, and ate a section of orange. The man came into the room and settled into the chair across from the bed with that same boneless, deliberate stillness. In the warmer light, Harry could see that he was beautiful, in a way that nothing biological should be, not handsome, not pretty, but genuinely beautiful, like a painting of a person rather than the person themselves. It was unsettling. Harry decided to keep focusing on the orange. "My name is Arrow," the man said. "You are in Volterra, Italy, which I suspect is not where you intended to go." "I didn't intend to go anywhere specific," Harry said honestly. "I just went." "Yes, I saw," Arrow tilted his head. "That was rather spectacular for someone your size. The light you made when you arrived, my guard thought there was a lightning strike." "What is your name, Harry?" "Harry," Arrow repeated, tasting the word. "Do you have a family name?" Harry looked at the orange. "Potter." "And where is your family, Harry Potter?" Harry considered the question. "Vernon and Petunia were at 4 Privet Drive. Probably back from Brighton by now. Probably standing in the kitchen looking at the unlocked back door and the empty cereal box with identical expressions of cold fury. Aunt Marge was in Wolverhampton. His parents were dead." "I don't have one," he said. Arrow was quiet for a moment. He hadn't moved. Harry noticed this again, the absolute quality of his stillness. But something in his expression had shifted, something attentive and careful. "Will you let me see your hand?" Arrow asked. Harry looked up. "Why, I have a gift," Arrow said simply. "When I touch someone's hand, I can see everything they've ever thought or felt. I find it tells me more about a person than any amount of conversation." He paused. "I would very much like to know about you, Harry Potter, and I find I prefer the honest way." Harry thought about this. A man with red eyes in a stone castle in Italy wanted to read his mind by touching his hand. There were a number of reasons this should have been frightening. But the room was warm, and his stomach was full for the first time in 4 days, and the man had sat down instead of looming, and asked instead of demanded, and Harry had spent 7 years in a house where nobody was honest about anything. He held out his hand. Arrow reached across and took it in both of his, and his touch was cool as river water, and his face went very still. Harry watched it happen, not panic, not distaste, but something moving across those ancient features that he would later understand was awe. Arrow's eyes tracked behind closed lids, quick and intent, the way eyes moved in deep sleep, and Harry felt nothing unusual, just the coolness of the hands around his, until Arrow's grip tightened very slightly, which was the only indication Harry had that whatever was happening was significant. It lasted perhaps 2 minutes. Then Arrow opened his eyes and he was looking at Harry differently, not the way Vernon looked at him, like something inconvenient, or the way his teachers looked at him, like something puzzling, or even the way Mrs. Fig looked at him, like something that required watching. He was looking at Harry the way Harry had once looked at the seaside, the first time the school had taken them on a trip, standing on the shingle and staring at the water going all the way to the horizon, with the expression of someone confronted with something much larger than expected. "I see," Arrow said softly. "What do you see?" Harry asked. "Everything," Arrow said, and then after a pause, "Do you know what you are, Harry?" "A freak," Harry said. It came out flat and factual because that was how he'd learned to say it, not bitterly, just accurately, the same way he'd say my hair doesn't stay flat or I'm bad at cooking. The look on Arrow's face then was the first time Harry Potter had ever seen something that might have been anger on his behalf. Not pity, not discomfort. Something sharp and directed and cold. "No," Arrow said, "you are not that. You are the most extraordinary thing I have encountered in 3,000 years, and that is a number large enough to contain a great many extraordinary things." He set Harry's hand down gently. "But we will have time for that conversation. Tonight you will eat and sleep, and tomorrow I will show you where you are. Is that acceptable?" Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about the locked door and the darkness and the pipes. "Yes," he said, "that's acceptable." He met the other two the following morning. Arrow came to collect him after breakfast, more bread, eggs this time, fruit, a small cup of something warm and sweet that he was told was called Caf d'Orzo because someone had apparently decided he was too young for actual coffee, and walked him through corridors of vaulted stone that were cool and quiet and enormous, past archways that framed rooms full of books and rooms full of art, and one room that appeared to be full entirely of maps. Harry kept up without complaint. His legs were short, but he'd spent years navigating spaces quickly and quietly, and Arrow set a pace that was brisk without being unkind about it. They came to a room that was larger than all the others, circular, stone-floored, lit by high windows, with 3 chairs arranged at one end that were not quite thrones but were not quite not thrones either. 2 men sat in 2 of the chairs. Both of them looked at Harry the way Harry was learning to expect things to happen here, with complete, focused attention, nothing withheld. The first was pale like Arrow, dark-haired, and wore his contempt for most things as an expression. His eyes were also red, his jaw tight, and he looked at Harry with the specific assessment of someone deciding whether a thing was a threat or a waste of time, holding his conclusion in reserve. The second barely seemed to be in the room at all. He was the palest of the 3, gray-pale, and his eyes held a quality that Harry would much later find a word for: exhaustion. But the kind that only comes from having seen too much and lost too much and continued anyway. The bone-deep tiredness of someone who has outlived their reason to be awake. He looked at Harry and something in his face moved, the way water moves when something is dropped into it from a great height, a single ripple settling quickly. "Harry," Arrow said pleasantly, "these are my brothers, Caius and Marcus." Caius looked at Harry the way he might look at an object brought in from outside, assessing contamination risk. Marcus simply watched him with those gray, quiet eyes. "Why is he here?" Caius asked. He spoke to Arrow but kept his eyes on Harry, and his voice was exactly as pleasant as a blade. "Because I invited him," Arrow said. "You invite strays in off the street now." "He is not a stray," Arrow said, and there was something in the way he said it that ended the direction of the conversation definitively. "He is, I believe, the most powerful magical being I have ever had the privilege of encountering, and he arrived in our city alone, at age 7, having performed accidental transportation magic over approximately 2,000 kilometers of distance." He paused. "I thought he might like to stay." The room was very quiet. Marcus spoke for the first time. His voice was low and measured, and he was still looking at Harry with that particular quality of attention. "The boy's connections," he said to Arrow, "are severed almost entirely. You can see it if you look." Harry didn't know what that meant. He knew it was about him, and he stood in the center of the stone floor and looked at Marcus steadily, the way he'd learned to look at Vernon when Vernon was in one of his moods, not challenging, not afraid, just present and watchful. "Show me something," Caius said abruptly. Harry turned to look at him. "What? Your magic, show me something." "Arrow says you're extraordinary. I've spent 3,000 years being told things are extraordinary and then being disappointed." He met Harry's eyes. "Convince me." The fire in Harry's chest, which had settled overnight into something more like a quiet heat than a roar, stirred. "What would convince you?" Harry asked. Caius tilted his head very slightly. "It might have been the beginning of respect. Surprise me." Harry looked around the room. He was 7 and tired, and he'd never tried to do magic on purpose in his life, because on Privet Drive doing magic on purpose was how you got locked in the cupboard for a week. Every magical thing he'd ever done had come out of him when he wasn't thinking, when he was feeling too much, when the fire in his chest got too hot to contain. So Harry stopped thinking. He looked at the high windows, at the morning light coming through them in long gold bars, and he felt the warmth of it, and he thought about the orange from last night and the bread that had still been warm and the bed that was soft, and the way Arrow had said not that when Harry called himself a freak, and the magic came up like water rising, easy and enormous, and the light in the room changed. Every candle that wasn't lit. Every window blazed, the light refracting through the stone as though the walls themselves had become something between solid and translucent. The air pressure changed, not dramatically, not violently, but the way a room changes when the weather outside turns, a settling and a deepening, and Harry was the center of it, standing small and barefoot on the stone floor while the light gathered around him like it was interested. He held it for 5 seconds and then let it go, and the room returned to normal, and he looked at Caius. Caius was looking back at him with an expression that had changed completely. "Well," he said, and for the first time there was nothing sharp in his voice. Just something reluctant and genuine. "You'll do." The weeks that followed had a dreamlike quality that Harry suspected had something to do with the fact that he'd spent the first 7 years of his life in such unrelenting gray. Everything was vivid here, saturated with color and warmth and sensation, and the castle, which was enormous, a whole system of corridors and halls and hidden rooms embedded in the hillside of the city, offered new things to discover on a daily basis. He met the guard, The guard were for the most part enormous and very still and absolutely courtless in a way that Harry found refreshingly honest. They either ignored you or watched you, and nobody talked to you with the false brightness of a primary school teacher who thought you were slow. Except Jane. Jane was small and blonde and beautiful, and she was also, Harry realized within approximately 40 minutes of meeting her, absolutely furious that he existed. She stood in the training hall on his second week, looking at him with eyes like coins, while her brother Alex stood beside her with the mild expression of someone watching an interesting weather event. "Arrow's new pet," Jane said pleasantly. "Jane," Alex said, the single word carrying the tone of someone who had been managing his sister's weaponized pleasantness for a very long time. "What?" she said. Harry looked at her. He was not, he realized, afraid of her. He registered that she was dangerous, you could feel it, the specific electric wrongness in the air around her, the same way you could feel a storm coming, but the fear itself didn't rise. The fire in his chest looked at Jane's fire and found it interesting rather than threatening. "I'm not a pet," Harry said, not defensively, just factually. "Arrow collects things," Jane said, "books, art, interesting creatures. You're small enough to be a novelty. So were you once," Harry said, and watched her eyes go very cold. "I assume." Alec made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Jane's gift moved toward Harry like a tide, and Harry felt the edge of it, the bright specific agony it promised, and then felt his own magic meet it at the boundary between them, and the two forces considered each other for a long moment like two weather systems colliding, and then Jane's gift stopped, and her expression went from rage to something genuinely startled, which was probably the most honest thing he'd seen on her face. She said. "I didn't do that on purpose," Harry told her, because he hadn't. "I know," she said, and the surprise hadn't quite left her eyes. She looked at him for another moment, recalculating. "You play chess? I know how." "Come on then," she said, and walked away down the corridor. After a second, Harry followed. Alec fell into step beside him, wearing the expression of someone whose day had taken an unexpected and entirely pleasing turn. "She likes you," Alec said. "She just tried to hurt me." "Yes," Alec agreed, "that's how you can tell." Arrow began his education in the second month. Not the academic kind that came through a series of tutors who arrived with books and left looking slightly singed, but the kind that was about understanding what he was. They sat in Arrow's study, which was warm and book-lined and smelled of old paper, and Arrow talked, and Harry listened, and asked questions with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to pretend questions are impolite. "There are two worlds," Arrow explained one evening, 3 candles burning between them on the desk. "The world most people see and the world beneath it. You belong to the second. What you are, this magic, this fire, it is old. Older than anything I know the name of. Your kind have been living in secret for as long as mine." "Your kind," Harry said. "What are you?" "Vampire," Arrow said, as though it were the most mundane word in any language. Harry thought about this. He looked at Arrow's red eyes and pale skin in perfect stillness and considered the word against what he'd observed over the past 2 months. The way none of them ate, the way they moved faster than sight when they thought he wasn't watching, the way sunlight hit the skin of the guards who sometimes patrolled the outer walls and scattered into prismatic light. "Right," Harry said. "And you run everything for vampires." "We maintain order," Arrow said with the modest precision of someone saying, "I own the ocean." "Yes." "And you want to keep me here." Arrow was quiet for a moment. In the candlelight he looked ancient, which of course he was, and Harry had spent 2 months watching him and learning the difference between the faces he wore for effect and the ones he wore when he wasn't performing. "This was the second kind. I want you to choose to stay," Arrow said. "There is a considerable difference. You could leave tonight if you wished. The doors are not locked to you, they never have been." Harry looked at the candles. The magic in his chest, which had grown considerably calmer in 2 months of being fed and warm and consistently not punished, moved softly like breathing. "What would I be if I stayed?" he asked. Arrow looked at him for a long moment. "Mind," he said. "In the way that matters, not a possession, a son," he paused. "I have never said that to anyone in 3,000 years. I find I mean it rather completely." The fire in Harry's chest did something it had never done before. It softened. Not extinguished, nothing so dramatic as that, but softened, the way metal softens in heat, becoming something that could be shaped rather than something that could only burn. "Caius thinks I'm a liability," Harry said. "Caius thought the printing press was a liability," Arrow said. "He is often wrong about new things and too stubborn to admit it quickly. He will come around." "He is already coming around, I've seen it." "And Marcus," Arrow said, "has already decided. He decided the moment he saw you in that room. Marcus is very rarely wrong about people." Harry was quiet for a while. Outside the window, Volterra glittered on its hill, amber lights against a black sky, the ancient city going about its ancient evening. "I want to learn everything," Harry said finally. "All of it. Magic and your laws and the history and how it all works. I don't want to be kept, I want to know." "Yes," Arrow said, and the delight in his voice was real and warm and 3,000 years old. "I rather thought you would say that." The first real test came on a Thursday, 6 weeks into Harry's residency, when a vampire from an Eastern coven arrived unannounced. His name was Doran, and he was large, and he was furious about something he hadn't explained yet, and he'd gotten through 3 of the outer guard before anyone thought to raise the alarm, which meant he was fast and old and not remotely concerned about consequences. He came into the Great Hall where Harry was sitting with a book, a real book, a history of Byzantine vampire politics that Arrow had recommended, which was proving to be genuinely gripping, and he stopped when he saw Harry because Harry was obviously not what he'd come for. "Where is Arrow?" he demanded. Harry looked up from his book. He could hear the guard moving in the corridor behind Doran, 4 of them, maybe 5, closing in now that the alarm had sounded. He could feel the wrongness of Doran, the age and the fury and the violence coiled in him, and the fire in his chest stood up to its full height, which was considerable. "He'll be here in a minute," Harry said. "Do you want to sit down?" Doran stared at him. "You're a child." "Well spotted." Doran's eyes narrowed. Something in him, the instinct that very old, very dangerous things develop to detect threats, flickered just slightly. "What are you?" "I live here," Harry said. The door behind Doran opened and Caius came in, not Arrow, moving with the flat precision of someone in a particular and terminal kind of mood. Behind him came 2 of the senior guard, Felix and Demetri, and the room's temperature dropped noticeably. Doran turned. Whatever he'd come here for, whatever the fury was about, it was still in his eyes, and he was old enough and angry enough to be stupid about it. "I have a grievance," Doran started. "You have a remarkable number of grievances for someone who just assaulted 3 members of my guard," Caius said. He hadn't stopped moving since he came in the door, and now he was between Doran and Harry, which Harry noticed with a small, surprised warmth. "The child," Doran said, jerking his head backward at Harry. "Why does the castle smell of human magic? Why is there a wizard child in the Volturi's hall?" "Because I'm here," Harry said helpfully. "This is a vampire seat," Doran said, "not a nursery for human abominations." The fire in Harry's chest went from standing to moving. He didn't think about it, he didn't decide. The magic came out of him the way water comes through a broken dam, not a wave, not a dramatic column of light, just suddenly present, filling the room from floor to ceiling like air filling a space. Every candelabra in the hall blazed simultaneously. The tapestries moved in a wind that had no source. The stone floor developed a vibration that was felt rather than heard, a low sustained note, like the room was a struck bell and Harry's magic was the hammer. Doran went very still. He was 300 years old. He had lived through wars and plagues and the specific ongoing violence of vampire politics. He had faced things that would reduce most people to memory, and he had not looked afraid in a very long time. He looked afraid now. "I am not an abomination," Harry said, and his voice was steady and his eyes were level and there was nothing frightened in him, nothing small, just the fire and the certainty and the fact of his own existence, undeniable and enormous. "You don't have to like that I'm here, but you'll be polite about it." The magic settled back into him slowly like a tide going out. The candles returned to normal. The tapestries stilled. Caius had turned around during this and was now facing Harry with an expression that took Harry a moment to identify because he hadn't seen it before, not directed at him. It was pride. "Felix," Caius said without looking away from Harry, "remove him. He can come back when he remembers his manners or not at all." The sound of Doran being efficiently removed from the hall followed. Caius stayed where he was, looking at Harry with those silver gold eyes, and Harry looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. "Your control is appalling," Caius said finally. "I know. We'll fix that." He looked Harry up and down once, the way a craftsman looks at raw material that has just demonstrated its quality. "You'll come to me for training starting Monday, dawn." "What about the tutors?" Harry asked. "After," Caius said. "Combat and control first, then books." He paused at the door and then said without turning around with the specific difficulty of someone performing an action that is unfamiliar but chosen, "You did well." He was gone before Harry could respond. Arrow arrived 14 minutes later, breathless in the way of someone who'd been moving very fast and was performing stillness now with partial success. He took in the room, the candles, the tapestries, Harry with his book still in hand, and looked at Harry with those ancient red eyes. "I hear there was an incident," he said. "There was a visitor," Harry said. "Yes." Arrow came into the room and sat down across from Harry, and his expression was the warm, delighted one that Harry was beginning to understand was genuine, not performed. "You frightened a 3-century-old vampire into silence with accidental magic, and then told him to mind his manners." "It wasn't entirely accidental," Harry admitted. "No," Arrow agreed, "it wasn't." He tilted his head. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about the cupboard, the padlock, the 4 days with almost nothing to eat, the hollow luminous feeling, the moment when everything had become clear and the magic had answered. He thought about Privet Drive, and the way nobody had ever once looked at him, the way the people in this castle looked at him, and the way Caius had turned around and worn an expression he clearly hadn't planned to wear. "I feel fine," Harry said, and meant it completely, which was new. Arrow looked at him for a long time and then he smiled, and it was not the public smile Harry had seen him use, the wide performative one, but something smaller and realer, the kind that lives in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. Good, he said. That is exactly what you should feel. Outside, Volterra settled into evening warm and gold and ancient, the city on its hill, the castle in its heart, and in one of its rooms a 7-year-old boy sat with a vampire 3,000 years his senior and felt, for the first time in his short and difficult life, the particular radical sensation of being exactly where he was supposed to be. The fire in his chest burned steady and warm, and Harry let it, and it lit the room, and nobody told him to put it out. Chapter 2. What kings are made of. 10 years changed a city the way 10 years changes most things, slowly, then all at once. Volterra was still gold in the afternoons, still climbed its hill in amber layers, still filled with tourists who photographed the piazzas and ate too much gelato, and never once looked at the hill's interior and wondered about the dark. The city had not changed, the castle had not changed. The guard rotated, occasionally thinned by attrition or politics or the particular violence of vampire disagreements, and replenished itself the way the Volturi had always replenished it, with the old method which was permanent and the new one, which involved a 17-year-old with green eyes and an unsettling habit of knowing when you were about to do something before you did it. Harry Potter had changed. He was tall now, which had surprised everyone including Harry, Lane, and dark-haired, with the kind of build that comes from a decade of training under someone who considered the word enough an insult. He moved the way the guard moved, quiet, economical, nothing wasted, but differently the way a river moves differently from a canal. The guard were precise because they were trained to be. Harry was precise because the magic ran through him like a current, and his body had simply arranged itself around it. The scar on his forehead remained, pale and lightning-shaped, a detail that Arrow had explained to him at length when Harry was 9, and had found the relevant books himself and arrived at Arrow's study door with questions that were considerably more pointed than Arrow had expected. They'd had that conversation, and then another one, and then a third one that lasted most of the night and covered prophecy and power, and the nature of the fragment of soul that had hitched a ride in Harry's scar like a parasite in a host. And at the end of it, Harry had looked at the fire in the study grate for a long time and then said, "That's not going to be a problem," with the flat certainty of someone identifying a logistical issue rather than an existential crisis. And Arrow had learned, not for the first time, that Harry Potter's relationship with his own mortality was singular. The fragment was gone by the time Harry was 12. He hadn't talked about how the scar remained. Caius had trained him every morning for 7 years, and the relationship between them had become something that neither of them would have named if asked, but that everyone in the castle could see. The way Caius corrected Harry's form with his hands when words weren't fast enough. The way Harry was the only person alive who could interrupt Caius mid-sentence and continue to have all his limbs afterward. The way Caius had attended every single one of Harry's significant magical events for a decade and stood at the back with his arms crossed, watching, wearing that expression he'd worn the first time, pride without performance, the real thing. Marcus watched everything and said little, which was exactly what Marcus had always done. Occasionally he said something brief and quiet that recontextualized everything else, and Harry had learned to listen for those moments the way you learn to listen for the specific silence before a storm. And Arrow had been delighted for 10 consecutive years, which was an extraordinary thing to sustain. And Harry privately thought it was because Arrow had spent 3,000 years being the most interesting person in any given room, and had found to his genuine joy that the room had finally given him competition. Jane had lost the chess game in the first week and demanded a rematch, which had led to another and another until they'd played so many games that they'd stopped counting and started just playing whenever one of them sat down in the other's vicinity. She was still faster than Harry in a fight, and they both knew it. Harry was stronger in every other dimension, and they both knew that too, and their détente was built on mutual acknowledgement of this, which was the only kind Jane could actually respect. Alec had attached himself to Harry in year 1 and stayed there, which meant Harry had spent a decade with a vampire shadow who was deeply interested in everything Harry found interesting and significantly more homicidal than Harry in all other respects. Harry considered Alec something between a brother and a personal disaster. This was the shape of his life on the morning the message came from Romania. The council room at dawn was lit blue-gray, the candles not yet lit for the day, the high windows letting in the first pale suggestion of morning. Arrow sat at the center of the long table. Caius was to his right, Marcus to his left. Harry sat across from them, which had been his position at these meetings since he was 14, and Arrow had decided that waiting in corridors was both beneath Harry's station and a waste of an excellent perspective. The messenger was a guard member named Petra, who was efficient and young by vampire standards, only 60 years, and who delivered information the way you delivered something fragile, carefully and completely. "The Sosiscu Coven," she said. "Eastern Romania, Carpathian foothills. We've had 3 reports over 8 months, all from different sources. They're taking humans," she paused, "not for feeding." The room was quiet in the way it got when something required full attention. "Elaborate," Caius said. "Experiments," Petra said. "They're trying to create something, half-turned maybe, or something else. The reports are inconsistent because the witnesses are frightened and the evidence is fragmentary." But 3 covens in the surrounding region have independently reported anomalies, things that shouldn't exist moving through their territories. Things that are alive but not quite right. Harry looked at the table. The magic in his chest moved in a slow, attentive way, like an animal lifting its head. How large is the coven? He asked. 6 confirmed members, possibly more. How old? The leader, Mercia, is approximately 500. The others are variable, and they've been doing this for 8 months without anyone moving on them, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Petra glanced at Arrow, who was watching Harry with that particular attention he kept for moments when Harry was about to say something worth noting. The surrounding covens are afraid, Petra said. Mercia's reputation is Mercia's problem and will shortly become ours, Harry said, if we don't move before he figures out whatever it is he's trying to figure out. Which we should assume he's close to, given 8 months of active work. He looked up at Arrow. I want to go. Yes, Arrow said, as though this had never been in question. Caius was looking at Harry with his eyes slightly narrowed, which was not displeasure but calculation. Take Jane and Alec, he said. Felix as tactical backup. You'll leave tonight. Tomorrow night, Harry said. Caius's eyes narrowed further. Why? Because I want to talk to the nearest coven first, the ones who reported the anomalies. Not over a messenger, in person. He leaned forward slightly. Someone who's been watching this for 8 months from a distance knows things they didn't put in a report. Fear edits information. The silence in the room lasted approximately 3 seconds. Tomorrow night, Caius agreed. Marcus, who had not spoken, looked up from the table and looked at Harry with his gray, deep eyes. Be careful of what you find, he said. Sometimes the thing being created is less dangerous than the desire that created it. Harry held his gaze. I know. Marcus looked back at the table, apparently satisfied. The drive to Romania took 17 hours, which Harry spent in the back of a blacked-out SUV reading, while Felix drove with the focused intensity of someone who found speed deeply meaningful, and Jane sat in the passenger seat being professionally impassive, and Alex sat next to Harry and talked at length about the history of Carpathian vampire politics, which Harry was already familiar with, but let Alec explain anyway, because Alec's version included editorial commentary that was genuinely entertaining. They stopped once at the edge of Hungary near the border, where a small stone farmhouse sat at the end of a dirt road between 2 dark fields. The Kovac Coven. 3 vampires, old by the way they moved, conservative by the way they'd arranged their territory, minimal contact, clean feeding practices. The kind of coven that simply wanted to be left alone and had been being left alone for the better part of 2 centuries. The eldest, a woman called Ursabet, came to the door when they arrived. She took one look at Harry and then looked past him at Jane and Alec, and then back at Harry, recalibrating. You're the prince, she said. Harry, he said. Can we come in? Inside, with tea she'd made out of politeness rather than necessity, Ursabet told them what she'd left out of her report. The first anomaly she'd encountered had been at the edge of her territory 6 months ago. Something moving through the trees that was alive but wrong in a way she couldn't identify, faster than a human, slower than a vampire, making sounds that were neither. She'd followed it for half a kilometer before it collapsed. What she found when she reached it, she described in a flat, careful voice that Harry recognized as the voice of someone who'd been trying to find different words for something that had no good words. It was a man, she said, or had been young, his eyes were open, he was still breathing. But whatever had been done to him, it wasn't. There was no quality in him that I would have called person. He was alive and empty like a shell on a beach. She paused. I ended it. I didn't know what else to do. Harry put his tea down. The other anomalies were the same, variations. One was partially turned, perhaps a third of the way. Another was something I've never seen before, something surgical. The way the body had been altered, she stopped. Ursabet, Harry said quietly. Tell me, she looked at him. Whatever she saw in his face, the steadiness, the absence of the horror she was expecting allowed her to continue, she told him. Harry listened without flinching, and the magic in his chest burned slow and cold, which was different from its usual warmth, and was the way it felt specifically when Harry was very angry and very controlled about it simultaneously. How many people do you think he's gone through? Harry asked when she was done. I don't know. Many, she looked at her hands. He's been doing this for longer than 8 months. The reports are 8 months old. The work is older. Harry stood up and thanked her, and she walked them to the door, and at the threshold she caught Harry's arm briefly, carefully, with the deference of someone who understood exactly who they were touching. End it cleanly, she said. Whatever it costs, end it. Yes, Harry said, that's the plan. The Sosisku Coven's territory was a stretch of Carpathian forest that had been wild and human-empty long enough to feel genuinely ancient. The kind of darkness between the trees that has been dark for centuries, heavy and organic, smelling of pine and cold water, and the specific damp of old-growth forest that never quite dries out. They moved through it in the small hours of the morning, 4 of them, the kind of quiet that is more thorough than silence. Harry had been to forests before. He had trained in them, hunted in them in the sense of Volturi training exercises, read about them extensively, He liked them. He liked the way the magic felt in wild spaces, less boundaried, more responsive, like the difference between a river in a channel and a river in its natural bed. He did not like what the magic was telling him about this particular forest. "Something's wrong here," Alex said quietly beside him. "Something's very wrong here," Harry agreed. The wrongness had a texture not magical, not exactly, but adjacent to magic the way a wound is adjacent to a body, defined by its relationship to the thing it was damaging. Whatever Mercia had been doing in his 8 months or longer period of unchecked experimentation, the evidence of it was in the ground and the air, a systemic wrongness that made the back of Harry's teeth ache. "There," Jane said. It was not a dramatic structure. A series of low stone buildings that might have been farmhouses once, set in a rough clearing, lights burning in 2 of the windows. The kind of place that looked unremarkable from a distance, and only resolved into something else when you got close enough to notice the details, the bars on the windows, the strange absence of sound from the tree line around it, the smell. The smell was the worst part. Harry's jaw tightened. He looked at Felix. "Stay at the perimeter. Anyone who tries to run, stop them." Felix, who was large and extremely literal, nodded and peeled away into the dark. Harry looked at Jane and Alec. "Ready?" Jane smiled, and it was the smile she used when she was about to do exactly what she was built for. Always. Alec just looked at Harry and raised an eyebrow, which in 10 years of knowing him, Harry had learned to read as obviously, "What a question." Harry walked to the front door of the main building and knocked. The door opened after a pause, and the vampire on the other side was young, 40 years, maybe 50, and looked at Harry with confusion that shifted rapidly to alarm. "I need to speak with Mercia," Harry said. "Who? Tell him Harry Potter is at his door," Harry said, "and that I've come from Volterra, and that it would be very much in his interest to come out rather than make this a conversation we have through architecture." There was a long pause, and then the young vampire retreated, and Harry stood on the threshold and waited, and the magic in his chest was very quiet and very still and very large. The pause lasted 6 minutes, which told Harry something about Mercia's state of mind, long enough to have a discussion, short enough to have decided against running. When the door opened again, the man who stood there was old. Not Arrow old, not Marcus old, but old in the compact, dense way of vampires who had survived long enough to be primarily substance, very little form. He was short and broad-shouldered, pale gray in the way of Eastern European vampires who had stopped feeding on humans exclusively sometime in the last century, with eyes that were an amber color that came from a mixed diet, and a mind that had clearly been calculating since the young guard member knocked on his door. "Prince," he said, and his accent was heavy and old. "You know why I'm here," Harry said. Mercia looked at him steadily. "I know what you think you know," he said. "You've spoken to Ursabet. Her account is incomplete. I'm aware, that's why I'm here in person." Mercia stepped back from the door, an invitation. Harry walked in. Inside was worse than outside. Not in the way of immediate violence, the room Mercia led him through was ordinary, stone-floored, book-lined, a fire burning in a large grate. But the smell was stronger here, and underneath the ordinary surface of the room there was a quality Harry had noticed before in places where terrible things happened regularly, a particular denseness in the air, the atmosphere of a space that had absorbed too much. 5 other vampires were in the room, arranged not casually, positioned, 3 near the walls, 2 near the fire. Harry clocked their positioning, and felt Jane do the same at his right shoulder. Mercia sat down and gestured to a chair across from him, with the courtesy of someone who had decided that the performance of normalcy was his best current strategy. "You've been experimenting on humans," Harry said, sitting and not softening it. "I've been working," Mercia said, "on a question that your masters in Volterra have been ignoring for centuries. What are we? What is the limit of what we can become, if the process of creation can be modified?" "You've killed dozens of people," Harry said. "I've lost subjects in the course of people," Harry said, "not subjects." "People?" He looked at Mercia steadily. The fire in his chest had made its decision some time ago and was simply waiting for the rest of the conversation to catch up. "I read your coven's history before I came. You were a scholar. Genuinely, before this, you wrote 4 significant papers on vampire physiology that Arrow has in his library and has cited in private correspondence." "That's not nothing," he paused. "What happened to that person?" Something moved in Mercia's amber eyes. Not regret, too old for simple regret, but something adjacent to it, the ghost of a relationship with his own choices. 500 years is a long time," Mercia said quietly. "It is," Harry agreed, "and I understand the question. The desire to push further no more, I understand it." He held Mercia's gaze. "But the answer to what you've built in those rooms," he tilted his head toward the back of the building, "is no. Not for any reason, not for any answer." He paused. "I need you to know that I understand this. I'm not here because I think you're a monster. I'm here because what you're doing has to stop, and the people you haven't killed yet need to be freed, and then we need to have an honest conversation about what happens next." Mercia was very still. And if I decline, he said carefully, to have that conversation, then we'll have a different kind of conversation, Harry said, and I'd rather not. The room went quiet. 3 vampires near the walls had moved, barely perceptibly, in the last 30 seconds, closing angles, the way trained fighters do when a situation is about to change. Jane's gift moved first. 2 of the wall vampires folded simultaneously, the silent agony of her ability dropping them without sound, and the third hesitated for a half-second that was enough for Alec's gift to roll through the room like a tide, severing the remaining coven members from their senses. A soft and complete blackout, no violence, just absence. Mercia was the last one standing, and Harry noticed, with something that wasn't quite respect but was adjacent to it, that he hadn't moved from his chair. "I told you to bring more people," said one of the collapsed vampires from the floor, apparently still conscious through Jane's ability, which meant his pain tolerance was significant. "Silence," said another, which was Alec's doing undone. Alec lifted a hand and redid it. Harry and Mercia looked at each other across the fire. "There are 6 humans in the building," Harry said. 2 in the basement level, 4 in the structure behind this one. 3 of them are in conditions that I expect are serious. He said this not as a threat but as a statement of logistics. "I need your cooperation to reach them without further incident, and I'm asking for it rather than simply taking it because I believe you're still capable of making a choice." Mercia's jaw was tight. In his amber eyes, something complicated was occurring, the 5-century argument between what he'd built himself into and what he'd started as, playing out in the space of a few seconds. "The woman in the basement nearest the east wall," he said slowly. "She has been sedated. The sedative is on the shelf above her. The reversal agent is the blue vial, not the red one." He paused. "The man in the structure outside has a compound fracture that hasn't been set. He'll need a hospital quickly." "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it. Mercia looked at him with something that in a younger face would have been confusion. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Arrow's creatures are usually—" "I'm not Arrow's creature," Harry said. "I'm Arrow's son." "There's a difference." He stood. "Stay in the chair." The 6 humans were, as Harry had expected, in serious condition. 2 were physically injured, 1 critically. The others were less damaged in body and significantly more damaged in other ways, with the particular quality of people who had been unmade and were now sitting in the pieces of themselves, not yet sure what to do with their hands. Harry spent 40 minutes in those rooms. He did not delegate this part. He was not a doctor and he didn't pretend to be, but he was 17 and had spent a decade learning everything Arrow had put in front of him, and Arrow's library was extraordinary. He stabilized what could be stabilized, packed wounds with the supplies Felix had brought from the vehicles because Harry had anticipated needing them, and sat with the woman from the basement, whose name was Anna, he learned because he asked, while the sedative wore off and she oriented herself back into the fact of being alive. She was in her 30s, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been striking before recent events had done what they'd done to it. She looked at Harry, at his face, young human in this place of old dark wrongness, and her eyes filled with tears that she was clearly furious at herself for. "You're going to be fine," Harry said. "Don't," she started, meaning don't say that, you don't know that. "You're going to be fine," Harry said again, and something in the way he said it, not reassurance, not performance, just certainty, made her breath slow. The magic which Harry had learned could do quiet things as well as large ones, settled around her like a warm hand. "I'm going to get you out of here. You're going to a hospital tonight and you're going to spend a few days there, and then you're going to go home or wherever home is, and you're going to have a life." He met her eyes. "I'm not telling you it'll be easy, I'm telling you it'll be yours." Anna looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone who has decided to believe a thing because the alternative is too heavy to carry. "Okay," she said. Harry helped her stand. The drive back through the forest was quieter than the drive-in. Felix had loaded the humans into the second vehicle with the efficiency of someone who found logistics clarifying, and Jane had taken point on the perimeter with 3 of the minor guard who'd arrived separately, and Alec was sitting on the steps of the main building cataloging the contents of Mercia's study with the focused interest of a scholar who had discovered an archive. Mercia himself was restrained in the main room, along with 2 of his coven who were lucid enough to be relevant. The other 3 had been less rational about the resolution, and had made choices Harry had not been able to walk back from. He'd made those choices calmly and without cruelty, and without, notably, needing Jane or Alec or Felix to intervene, which had produced in each of them a slightly new understanding of exactly what Harry could do when the magic was not accidental. Harry sat on the steps outside as the sky began to lighten toward pre-dawn and looked at the forest, and felt the wrongness in the air already beginning to dissipate because the source of it was ending. Caius would need a full report. Arrow would want every detail of Mercia's research secured or destroyed. There would be the question of what was done with the surviving coven members, and the human survivors, and the regional covens who'd been living with this in their backyard for the better part of a year. Harry was already organizing it, But for a moment, sitting on the steps in the pre-dawn dark with the forest settling around him, he let himself be 17 and sit in the quiet. Alec came out and sat beside him. He didn't say anything, which was the specific Alec mode that meant he had something significant to say and was deciding how. "You sat with her for 40 minutes, Alec said finally. "Yes, I was watching the time," he paused. "I wouldn't have done that." "I know," Harry said, not critically, just factually. "Is that?" Alec turned his head. His expression in the gray light was the one he wore when he was genuinely at sea, which was rare enough that Harry paid attention to it. "Is that because you're still human, technically?" Harry looked at the trees. "It's because she was scared and alone and I knew what that felt like." Alec was quiet for a moment. "So it's an advantage." Harry looked at him, and for a second the humor broke through, the genuine warmth that lived underneath the fire, never extinguished by training or time or everything that had been asked of him. "Yes, Alec," he said. "Knowing what people feel is an advantage. It's almost like beings that are supposed to be human-shaped should develop human feelings." Alec made the face he made when Harry said something that he was processing. "I have feelings." "You have preferences and loyalties and a personal vendetta against bad scholarship. That's a start. I'm going to put something unpleasant in your tea when we get back." "You've been threatening that for 3 years. I'm very patient," Alec said. Harry laughed, short and genuine, and the pre-dawn forest was quiet around them, and the magic in his chest burned warm and steady. And somewhere in the stone building behind them, a 5-century-old scholar sat in a chair and thought about choices. And somewhere in the second vehicle, 6 people breathed the cool air of very early morning and were alive. And that was the shape of the world right now, imperfect and complicated and exactly what Harry had come here to create. They were back in Volterra by the following evening. Arrow met them in the Great Hall. He looked at Harry with the specific quality of attention he used when he was reading a room before he read a person, taking in the details, the quality of the return, what 4 people looked like after a night of significant events. "Sit down," he said, which he rarely said. He meant all of you, but he was looking at Harry. Harry sat. He gave the full report without abbreviation, watching Arrow's face move through it, interest, then something darker at the section about the humans, then the quiet satisfaction of someone hearing that their decisions about how to train a person paid out exactly as hoped. When Harry was done, Arrow was quiet for a moment. "Mercia," he said, "is alive," Harry said. "Restrained 4 cells down," he paused. "I want to make a recommendation." Arrow raised an eyebrow. His research, the legitimate parts, the scholarship from before this descended into something indefensible, it's genuinely significant. Alec has it catalogued. If we lock him in a cell permanently, we lose 5 centuries of knowledge that no one else has. If we, Harry paused, choosing the word carefully, redirect him, structure him, give him questions to answer that don't require hurting anyone. He's not a broken instrument, he's a me-aimed one. "You're asking me to rehabilitate a criminal," Arrow said, and his tone was genuinely curious. "I'm asking you to do something intelligent with him," Harry said, "which is what you do with everything else." Caius, who was standing to the left, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was too short and too controlled to be a laugh, but it was in the vicinity. Arrow looked at Harry for a long time with those ancient red eyes. "I'll consider it," he said. Which was, Harry knew, almost yes. Later, in Arrow's study, with 2 candles burning and the windows showing the night city, Arrow poured himself nothing and watched Harry drink tea, and didn't speak for long enough that Harry knew something was forming, the way weather forms, and waited for it. "You've become something," Arrow said finally, "that I'm not entirely sure I have a category for." Harry looked up. "Is that a problem?" "Quite the opposite." Arrow leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his beautiful ancient face intent. "I have been watching people for 3 millennia. I have turned kings, scholars, soldiers, artists. I have watched the finest minds of every century come into my house and grow into what they were capable of. And I have never, not once, watched a person grow into what you have grown into." Harry held his gaze. "Which is," Arrow looked at him and said simply, "someone who does not need me." The quiet in the study was the warm kind, not the empty kind. "That's not true," Harry said. "Oh, it is," Arrow said, and he was smiling, the real one. "You haven't needed me since you were 10, honestly, but you've chosen to stay, which is, you understand this is entirely without precedent. Nobody chooses Volterra. It is where people end up. It has not in 3,000 years ever been where someone stayed freely." He paused, "And yet." "And yet," Harry agreed. He looked at the candles. The magic was warm tonight, domestic, the bank toll version rather than the river version, and it lit the room gently, and Harry thought about Anna looking at him in that basement while the sedative wore off, and the way she'd nodded, and what it had meant to go into that dark place and come back out again knowing that the people who needed to be whole were, and the people who needed to be stopped were, and the world had been moved a small but exact distance in the right direction. "There'll be more of it," Harry said. "More Mercias, more things in the dark that have been running long enough to get complicated." "Yes," Arrow said. "Good," Harry said, and the fire in his chest said the same thing, and he looked at the city through the window and felt 17 and ancient simultaneously. And tomorrow Caius would have notes about the mission, And Marcus would look at him with those gray eyes and say one quiet, devastating thing, and Jane would demand a chess game, and Alec would try to explain something at length, and the castle would be warm and full and exactly what it was. He finished his tea. "You should have brought a bigger reading light to Romania," Arrow said. Harry turned. "I was in a moving vehicle. You read in moving vehicles constantly. I had Felix with me. Watching me read makes him personally offended." "Then read faster than his ability to be offended," Arrow said archly. "I'll add it to the training list." Under what heading? Harry thought about it. Applied efficiency in the presence of the easily irritated. Arrow laughed, the real one, the one he couldn't entirely control, and the study was warm, and Volterra was gold outside the window even at night, because that was what it did. And Harry Potter sat in the heart of the oldest seat of power in the vampire world and felt, exactly as he had at 7 years old, precisely where he was supposed to be. Chapter 3, Old World, New Fire. The invitation to Forks was not technically an invitation. It was a file. 43 pages, assembled by Demetri with his usual thoroughness, photographs, field reports, third-party accounts. A timeline that began 8 months ago and had been developing complications ever since. Arrow dropped it on the council table on a Tuesday morning in November and let everyone read it in silence before he said anything. Because Arrow understood theater, and he understood that some information landed harder without preamble. Harry read it in 4 minutes. He set it down and looked at the window. The summary was this. A coven in the Pacific Northwest of America, operating under a treaty with a local wolf pack, had acquired a human girl who knew what they were. The coven, the Cullens, 7 members, established old money, operating a compelling cover identity as a family unit in a small logging town, had handled this with what Arrow's report characterized as admirable restraint, and what Harry's private reading of the same facts characterized as an extended, complicated hesitation. The girl was still human. The coven's youngest male, Edward, was apparently in love with her. There was a secondary vampire situation, a nomadic coven, a near miss with exposure that had been resolved but left edges. The region was producing more variables than the Volturi's standard monitoring threshold for unresolved exposure risks. There was also a note added in Arrow's handwriting at the bottom of the final page. Edward's ability is telepathic. Reports suggest it is comprehensive and has never failed to penetrate any subject. Harry looked at that note for a moment and then turned the page over. "We should visit," Arrow said pleasantly. Caius looked like he'd been waiting for someone to say this for some time. "The girl is a liability. The girl is a variable," Harry said. "Those are different things." "In this case, they're the same thing," Caius said. "Not necessarily." Harry leaned back in his chair. "She knows. She's known for months and the exposure hasn't propagated. That's either discipline or genuine investment in keeping the secret, and discipline at 17 is unusual enough to be worth examining." Marcus, who had been looking at the ceiling with his habitual quality of being present in body while somewhere else entirely, lowered his gaze to the table. "The bonds in that coven are interesting," he said. Everyone looked at him. "The Cullen family's connections," he said, "are not performance. Whatever they are to each other, it is real, worth seeing in person." He paused. "The girl's connections to the coven are equally real. She is not a peripheral element." "So we go," Harry said. "We go," Arrow agreed, and looked at Caius with the expression he used when he'd already decided something and was waiting for Caius to arrive at the same position through his own route. Caius looked at the file, then at Harry, then at Arrow. "I want it resolved cleanly," he said. "One way or the other." "One way or the other," Harry confirmed. He told Jane that night. She was in the training hall, not training but sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, which was the position Jane used when she was thinking and wanted to look like she wasn't. Harry sat across from her on the mat with his legs crossed, and the cold November air coming through the high window. "Forks," she said, tasting the word with the specific distaste of someone who has a file on a place and is not enthusiastic about it. "Washington State, Olympic Peninsula." "I know where Forks is," she paused. "The Cullens are vegetarians. I'm aware. Their eyes are, they look at you like you've done something wrong," Jane said. "I met Carlisle Cullen 20 years ago in Rome. He has the energy of someone who is deeply disappointed in the life choices of everyone around him." "To be fair," Harry said, "Carlisle's life choices include maintaining a veneer of moral superiority while operating as a practicing doctor whose patients regularly get the unsettling feeling that their surgeon hasn't blinked in a while." Jane's mouth did the thing it did when something was funny and she was resisting it. "Edward reads minds. Apparently," she looked at him, "he won't be able to read yours." "No," Harry agreed. "That's going to unsettle him significantly." "Yes," Harry said, "it probably is." Jane looked at the ceiling. In the cold light of the training hall, she was exactly what she was: ancient and small and deeply dangerous, and to Harry in a way that was entirely specific, something like home. He'd spent a decade next to her. He knew the chess moves she made when she was bored versus the ones she made when she was actually trying. He knew the sound her gift made when she was angry versus when she was doing a job. He knew the particular quality of her silence when something had gotten through her armor, which was rare and which she acknowledged to absolutely no one. "Is Alec coming?" she asked. "He volunteered before I could ask." "Of course he did," she paused. "He's been reading about American vampire territories for the past week. You didn't ask him to." "No, he does that," Jane said. "When he's invested in something." She said it neutrally, but it landed the way Jane's neutral statements usually landed, as observations that contained conclusions she was leaving for you to draw. "He's coming," Harry said. "So are you if you want." "I always want," Jane said. "I know," Harry said and stood up, and the cold air moved between them, and outside Volterra was dark and golden and the night was long. They flew to Seattle on a Thursday. 6 of them, Harry, Jane, Alec, Felix, Demetri, and a guard member named Corin who was efficient and invisible in the specific way that made her valuable, and drove the last stretch through the kind of weather that felt like someone had described Washington state to a climate, and it had taken the description personally. Rain, gray sky, trees so dense and dark they looked painted rather than grown, roads winding through hills that felt ancient in the Pacific Northwest way, which was different from Volterra's ancient but comparably serious. Harry watched the trees go past from the passenger seat and felt the magic in his chest respond to the forest the way it always did, attentive, breathing out. Wild spaces agreed with him. They always had. Demetri was driving because Demetri drove everywhere, being the kind of person who found navigating unfamiliar geography personally meaningful. He had already identified the Cullen property, 30 kilometers outside Forks, isolated, architecturally significant in a way that Harry would assess when he saw it, and had a secondary position mapped at the edge of their established territory. "They know we're coming," Demetri said. "They'd know anyway," Harry said. "Edward reads minds and Jasper reads emotions and Alice sees decisions. There's no element of surprise here. Does that bother you?" Harry thought about it. "No, it simplifies things. There's no point in any of us performing. They'll know what everyone in the room is feeling regardless." Demetri glanced at him. "They won't know what you're feeling." "No," Harry agreed, "they won't." What he didn't say, because saying it would have been redundant with Demetri of all people, was that this was strategically interesting rather than strategically compromising. A room where one person is the only unread mind is a room where everyone else's attention eventually gravitates toward that person. And Harry had learned at 7 years old, sitting across from a 3,000-year-old king, that being the most interesting variable in a room was not a disadvantage. The Cullen house was, as expected, architecturally significant. It sat in the forest in the way of something that had decided the forest was its specific business. Tall, angular, glass-fronted, the kind of modernist structure that required a great deal of money and a certain philosophy to build and maintain. It was beautiful in a cold, precise way, and the lights inside it were warm, which struck Harry as deliberate. Someone had made decisions about how this house should feel from the outside. Someone had wanted it to look like a home. He stood on the gravel driveway and looked at it for a moment before they went in, and felt the magic in his chest do its attentive thing, reading the territory the way it always read spaces, not analytically, just feeling for the shape of things. 7 vampires inside, 1 human. The human's heartbeat was steady, which meant she was either very calm or very good at presenting as calm. And outside at the tree line, at 3 separate points, large warm presences that were animal in some bone-deep way, smelling of forest and heat, and something Harry didn't have a word for yet. "The wolves are watching," he said quietly to Demetri. "I know, I've had them since the county line. Don't do anything about it. They're here because they have a treaty to enforce and a human to protect. That's not hostile, it's responsible." He looked at the tree line once just to acknowledge that he knew they were there, and then looked back at the house. The front door opened before he knocked. Carlisle Cullen looked exactly like his file photograph, which meant he looked like the specific category of person who was very accomplished and knew it, and had decided that the gracious thing to do with that knowledge was be warm about it. He was tall, blonde, old in the way of very practiced stillness, with gold eyes that held the quality Marcus had described as the face of someone disappointed in the life choices of everyone around him, which Harry now understood was not disappointment exactly, but rather the expression of someone who had chosen a different path and bore the choosing of it with the particular weight of the long committed. "We've been expecting you," Carlisle said, and his voice was measured and his welcome was genuine, both things simultaneously. "I know," Harry said. "Thank you for the courtesy of a prepared house rather than a hostile one." Carlisle's eyes moved across the group, Jane, Alec, Felix, the others, and then back to Harry, recalibrating. He'd expected Arrow's representatives. He'd received something that looked like Arrow's representatives with something at the center that didn't fit the category. "You're not a vampire," Carlisle said. "No, but you're with the Volturi." "I am Volturi," Harry said. "Come in." They went in. The main room was large and light-filled and arranged with the self-conscious naturalness of a space that had been very carefully designed to feel uncurated. Bookshelves, musical instruments. Art on the walls that had been selected rather than collected. 7 vampires standing at various points in the room with the posture of people who had planned their positions in advance and were maintaining them through effort. Harry read the room. Carlisle near the center, composed, hosting the social architecture of the encounter resting primarily on him. Esme to his left, warm, watchful, the specific warmth of someone who had built a family from nothing and would protect it through anything. Rosalie, near the far wall, beautiful, hostile, armored in that hostility, the way some people use beauty as a weapon and defense simultaneously. Watching Harry with the specific attentiveness of someone whose threat assessment instinct was excellent. Emmett beside Rosalie, large, alert, with the quality of someone who was capable of significant violence and preferred not to use it, and found the preference genuinely felt rather than cultivated. Jasper, near the stairs, the quietest presence in the room despite being one of the most dangerous, his gold eyes tracking the room's emotional weather with the expression of someone who can feel exactly what everyone is experiencing and is currently having a complicated time with the results. Alice next to Jasper, small, quick, with the particular quality of eyes that are watching something other people can't see, her expression moving through information that was private to her as Harry watched. And Edward. Edward was standing at the edge of the room near the windows, and he was looking at Harry with an expression that had moved through confused and arrived at something that was closer to genuinely unsettled. He was, Harry noted, the most conventionally striking of the family, sharp features, bronze hair, the look of someone who had been frozen at a particular pitch of brooding intensity and had never had occasion to move past it. His gold eyes were intent and focused on Harry with the specific focus of someone trying very hard to hear something that wasn't making sound. Harry met his gaze and waited. Edward's jaw tightened fractionally. He tried again, the way you try a door that hasn't opened, leaning into the mechanism. Nothing. Harry watched him realize it, the full realization landing in stages, confusion, then genuine confusion, then the particular discomfort of someone whose primary interface with the world had suddenly developed a blind spot that was standing in their living room making eye contact. "It's strange, isn't it?" Harry said, not unkindly, "being in a room with someone you can't read." Edward's expression was complicated. "That's never happened before. I know, I read your file." The room had recalibrated around this exchange. Carlisle was watching with focused attention. Alice was tilting her head in the specific way of someone whose future vision had just gone locally blank. Jasper had gone slightly more still than he'd been, which Harry read as the emotional landscape of the room becoming suddenly harder to navigate. "Why can't he hear you?" Rosalie asked. She directed this at Harry rather than Edward, which Harry noted. She'd assessed that Harry was the better source of that information. "Magic," Harry said simply, "different architecture." "You're a witch," Esme said, and there was nothing hostile in it, just placing the information. "Wizard," Harry said, "technically, though the distinction is more cultural than functional. The wizarding world and the vampire world have known about each other for centuries," Carlisle said, "but the Volturi have never," he paused, choosing carefully. "The Volturi haven't historically employed wizards." "I'm not employed," Harry said. He said it pleasantly. "I'm family." The word landed in the room and occupied it. Jane, who had been standing at Harry's left in the professional stillness of someone who was a guard in form and something else in practice, allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Alec, to Harry's right, looked around the Cullen living room with the expression of someone on a mildly interesting tour. Carlisle offered them seats, which was again the grace note of someone who understood that the performance of hospitality was load-bearing in tense situations. Harry sat. Most of the others remained standing, because vampires in unfamiliar territory defaulted to upright, but Harry sitting changed the room's geometry in a useful way. It moved the encounter from confrontation to conversation, and Carlisle, who was intelligent, recognized this and visibly appreciated it. The human girl came downstairs. Harry had read her file too. Isabella Swan, 17, recently relocated to Forks from Phoenix, daughter of the local police chief, currently the most consequential variable in a situation that had been generating paperwork in Volterra for 8 months. The file had described her as observant, stubborn, with an unusual capacity for remaining calm in supernatural situations. It had not described her as someone who would come down the stairs into a room full of Volturi representatives and look at the situation with the assessing steadiness of someone taking stock before deciding on a next move. She looked at Harry first, not because he was closest, but because he was sitting, which made him the most unusual thing in the room's current arrangement. "You're not a vampire," she said, which Harry was beginning to accept as his standard greeting in vampire spaces. "No." "Harry Potter." He didn't offer a hand because she was standing 8 feet away and it would have been awkward. "You're Bella." "Everyone knows who I am, apparently," she said. "You're in a file," Harry said. "I wouldn't take it personally. Most people with exposure risk end up in a file. It's administrative rather than sinister." "That's a very reassuring way to describe being in the Volturi's paperwork," Bella said. "I try." Edward had moved slightly, in the way of someone who wanted to be between Bella and a perceived threat, and was restraining the impulse with effort. Harry noticed this and filed it not as hostility, but as information about what Edward valued, which was useful. "Can we speak plainly?" Harry said, looking at Carlisle. "Please," Carlisle said. "The situation as it stands," Harry said, "is sustainable but not indefinitely. A human who knows about vampires is a variable." Variables that remain unresolved accumulate risk over time. Volterra's position on this is not punitive, it's structural. The secret exists because everyone works to maintain it, and maintenance requires resolution. He looked at Bella. Specifically, you either become part of the community you know about or you don't know about it anymore. Become part of it meaning become a vampire, Bella said. Yes, or don't know about it meaning. Meaning we remove the knowledge, Harry said. There are ways to do this that cause no harm. I want to be honest about the full picture rather than present you with a partial one. Bella looked at him steadily. Which would you recommend? The question surprised the room. Esma's expression shifted. Edward went very still. Harry thought about it genuinely because she'd asked genuinely and she deserved a genuine answer. You're 17, he said. So am I for another few months. And I was in a situation at 7 years old where someone gave me a choice between a life that was certain and small and known and a life that was uncertain and large and unknown, and I chose the second one without hesitation. He paused. But my known life was terrible, which made the choice simpler. Yours isn't terrible, so I can't tell you what I'd choose in your place because I've never been in your place. He held her gaze. I can tell you that the people in this room who love you are real, and whatever you decide should be decided with that as a fact, not a variable. Bella was quiet for a moment. Then you're not what I expected from the Volturi. I get that a lot. He really does, Alec confirmed from across the room helpfully. Edward spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. You're going to ask her to decide today, he said. It came out like an accusation but landed like a fear. No, Harry said. Edward's expression shifted. He'd been constructing an argument and the floor had disappeared under it. No. I'm not here to issue a deadline. I'm here to meet the people involved, make my own assessment and report back. Harry looked at him directly. I've read your file too, Edward. You've been putting off this conversation for months because you're afraid of what she'll lose if she chooses this life. And she's been wanting to have the conversation because she's already made her decision and keeps getting managed away from it. He paused. I'm not going to tell you both what to do, but I am going to tell you that the current pattern where one person has decided and the other person is protecting them from their own decision is not actually protection. The silence in the room was the dense kind. Bella was looking at Harry with the expression of someone who had just heard something said aloud that had been living in them unexpressed for a very long time. Edward was looking at Harry with an expression that was complicated and real, and had moved entirely past the category of Volturi representative and into the category of person saying something I don't want to be true. You're 17, Edward said. Yes, Harry said, we covered that. And you're telling me? I'm telling you what I see, Harry said. You can do what you want with it. Jasper made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, and Emmett across the room visibly suppressed something that would have been a grin. Rosalie was looking at Harry with an expression that had changed from the initial hostility into something more ambivalent. The expression of someone whose threat assessment has downgraded, but whose interest has not. What's your actual recommendation? Carlyle asked. To Volterra, what will you tell them? That this coven is stable, functional, and operating in good faith, Harry said. That the human situation is in progress and will resolve naturally without external pressure if given reasonable time. That the regional situation, the treaty, the wolves, the secondary covens, is managed competently and does not represent an exposure risk in the near term. He looked at Carlyle. And that Carlyle Cullen runs a household that I would characterize as genuinely principled rather than performatively so, which is rarer than it should be and is worth noting. Carlyle looked at him for a long moment. Something in his gold eyes had shifted, the quality of someone who had prepared for a difficult meeting and found instead a complicated one, which was harder in some ways and better in others. Thank you, he said, and meant it. The afternoon went in a direction Harry had not specifically planned for, which was fine. Plans were frameworks, not mandates. Emmett, who had been assessing Harry with the focused curiosity of someone who evaluated physical capability as a primary language, asked at some point whether Harry wanted to spar. He asked it with the specific casualness of someone who was actually quite interested in the answer and was covering this with ease. Sure, Harry said. They went outside because Esme had a look about breaking indoor things and the house was clearly cared for. The backyard was forest-edged, cold, the November sky low and gray and periodically delivering light rain in the disorganized way of Pacific Northwest weather. Emmett was enormous and moved the way very large things moved when they were also very fast, with the particular physics of something that had stopped having to be careful about how much force it used. Harry looked at him across the wet grass and felt the magic wake up in its full, attentive way, not the warm domestic fire of Volterra evenings, but the deep river version, wide and strong and completely unhurried. Emmett moved first. He was quick and he was powerful and he hit like weather, and Harry's magic met him 3 steps in, not deflecting but answering, a wall of force that was barely visible, a shimmer in the air. And Emmett ran into it and stopped, which was physically astonishing to watch. A 6-foot vampire at full speed simply stopping, as though the air had become something solid. Emmett stared at his own arrested momentum. That's not fair, he said, and he sounded delighted. It's not really about fair, Harry said. Can you do it in all directions? Yes. Can you do it without thinking about it? Yes. Emmett turned around to look at Rosalie, who had come out to watch, and his expression was the expression of someone who has discovered a thing that they find genuinely wonderful. Rosalie, he said, he stopped me with heir. I saw, Rosalie said. Heir, Emmett said again to clarify, I understand. That's, he turned back to Harry, can you do something else? I need to see more. Harry looked at the tree line and felt the magic and let it do something small, drew the rain out of the immediate vicinity, just a 5-meter circle of dry air around them, the water parting and falling outside it like a curtain. Emmett looked up at the dry sky above them and the rain coming down around them, and his expression was the purest thing Harry had seen all day. I have so many questions, Emmett said. I have time, Harry said, and meant it, because there was something in Emmett's uncomplicated enthusiasm that was genuinely refreshing after a year of politics and guard management, and the weight of things that required careful handling. They spent 40 minutes in the rain curtain. Emmett asked questions with the focused curiosity of someone who had found an entirely new field of interest, and Harry answered them honestly, which was the only way he answered things, and the afternoon passed with the particular quality of time that moves well because the people spending it are spending it on something real. Jane was watching from the porch, managing to project both professional presence and the slight air of someone waiting to go home that she'd been perfecting for a century. Alice appeared next to Jane at some point and stood beside her, both of them small and blonde and watching Harry in the rain circle, and after a while Alice said in the quiet voice she used for things that mattered, I can't see him, at all. His future is just blank to me. I know, Jane said, that doesn't worry you. Jane was quiet for a moment, watching Harry let the rain back in, the water falling through the space where he'd been standing and Harry shaking the wet out of his hair with the ease of someone who'd been doing whatever they wanted with weather for years. No, Jane said. It doesn't worry me, she paused, and the pause had something in it that she didn't name. He doesn't need to be seen to be known. Alice looked at her. Jane's expression was the neutral one, the professional one, impenetrable as always. That's almost sweet, Alice said carefully. Tell anyone, Jane said pleasantly, and I'll show you what sweet looks like. They left at dusk. Harry shook Carlisle's hand at the door, and Carlisle held it a half-second longer than a handshake required, which meant he wanted to speak but hadn't decided on the words yet. What you said to Edward and Bella, Carlisle said, about the pattern. Yes, you were right, he paused. I've been doing the same thing, protecting her from a decision she has every right to make. He looked at Harry with those gold eyes that were so different from the red of Volterra, carrying a different weight, a different history. I don't know if that's your business to say or mine to hear. Both, probably, Harry said. Carlisle nodded once, the nod of someone who was going to sit with something uncomfortable and not run from it. Harry respected that. Bella was standing a few meters back and she looked at Harry as he turned and said, the file, what was in it, specifically? Observant, Harry said. Stubborn, unusual calm in supernatural situations. She thought about this, and your own assessment? Accurate, Harry said, plus smart enough to ask what was in the file, she almost smiled. That's not very Volturi of you. I'm a specific kind of Volturi, Harry said. The kind that's also a wizard. The kind, Harry said, that makes my own categories. He walked to the car. The wolves at the tree line had been watching for hours, and as Harry passed the edge of the driveway, one of them stepped partially into the open, enormous red-brown with amber eyes that held a quality of intelligence that was different from vampire intelligence, warmer and more immediate. Harry stopped. They looked at each other. The magic in his chest moved in the interested, attentive way it moved around wild things, the way it had moved around the Carpathian forest, the way it moved in open water or under open sky. The wolf, the boy inside the wolf rather, carrying something vast and ancient and completely alive, held his gaze without aggression, without submission, just looking, the way you look at something you're genuinely trying to understand. Harry held out a hand, palm up, not commanding, not threatening, just offering. The wolf took one step forward, enormous and careful, and sniffed his palm. The magic responded to it, shifted, recognized something old meeting something old, two different kinds of power acknowledging each other. Then the wolf stepped back and turned and went back into the trees. What was that? Alex said, from 3 feet behind Harry in the manner of someone who had been observing events they hadn't predicted. A conversation, Harry said. It looked like you offered your hand to a very large dog. It wasn't a dog, Alec. I know it wasn't. Alec paused. Did the magic do something just then? Yes. What? Harry looked at the tree line where the trees had closed again and the wolves were gone. Recognized a cousin, he said, and got in the car. Demetri drove back through the dark and the rain, and the forest was impenetrable on both sides of the road, and the magic in Harry's chest was quiet in the satisfied way of something that had been working well. Jane was in the passenger seat, which was unusual. Jane didn't typically choose proximity to anyone for comfort's sake. And she looked at the rain on the windshield without speaking for a long time. Alice couldn't see you, she said eventually. I know she told you. She told me in the way she tells things, framed as a general observation. Jane paused. She wasn't frightened of it. I think she was relieved. Harry looked at the dark trees. Why relieved? Because you were in her house and she had no idea what you were going to do, Jane said, and it turned out fine. Which means blank doesn't mean bad. She paused. That's useful information if you're someone who has to live with a gift that shows you the future. Harry thought about this. That's generous of you, he said. I'm not being generous, Jane said. I'm being accurate. Generous and accurate aren't mutually exclusive. Jane turned and looked at him with the expression she used when he'd said something she found inconveniently correct. I'm going to put something in your tea with Alec. You've been threatening that for, I mean it this time, she said. Carlisle Cullen shook your hand for 4 seconds and you let him. He wanted to say something. He could have said it with a normal handshake. Jane. I'm just noting, Jane, Harry said, amused. She turned back to the windshield. The rain came down and the trees went past in the dark, and she was silent for a moment in the specific Jane silence that meant something was present rather than absent. You told them Volterra is your family, she said. Yes. Caius is going to want a full report before you've even taken your coat off. I know. Marcus will look at you when you come in and say something in 7 words or less that makes the whole thing suddenly make sense. Probably. And Arrow will be unbearable about the wolves. He'll be fascinated, not unbearable. Those are the same thing, Jane said, when you're in the room with him for more than 4 hours. She paused. I'm glad you came on this one. You always say you don't care either way, Harry said. I always say a lot of things, Jane said without inflection and looked at the rain. Harry let it sit there because some things were better not turned over. Outside, the Pacific Northwest went past in darkness and water and the incomprehensible density of old-growth forest. And the magic in Harry's chest was warm and steady as a banked fire. And Felix in the backseat was asleep with the directness of someone who treated long drives as a logistical opportunity. And Alec had headphones in and was reading something on a tablet and would want to discuss it later in detail. And Demetri drove with his navigator's focus. And the rain came down on all of them equally, and the road went forward and they were going home. Volterra at midnight looked exactly like Volterra always looked, amber and gold and stone. The city on its hill, ancient and unhurried. The kind of place that has absorbed centuries of significant events without rearranging itself around any of them. Harry stood in the piazza for a moment after the cars had been taken. The same cobblestones, worn smooth by centuries of feet and weather. He'd arrived here on these stones at 23 minutes past 6 on a July evening, age 7, hands and knees, half delirious from hunger and the aftermath of accidental magic, and looked up at the city around him and found it beautiful before he found it anything else. He found it beautiful still. The castle door was open. It was always open to him, had been open to him for 10 years, a fact that remained extraordinary no matter how familiar. And the guard on the inner corridor acknowledged him with the nod that was reserved for people who were not visitors. And the hallways were warm and candlelit and smelled of old stone and old paper and the particular cold, clean scent of the vampires who lived in them. Which Harry had stopped noticing as strange somewhere around year 2, and had started noticing instead as simply the smell of being home. Arrow was in his study, of course he was. Arrow treated sleep the way the moon treated schedules, technically applicable but deeply secondary to current conditions. He was at his desk with 3 books open and a 4th in his hand, and he looked up when Harry came in with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting not with impatience but with interest, the way you wait for the next page of a story you're enjoying. Well, he said. Harry sat down in the chair across the desk, and put his feet up on the footstool that had appeared in this study somewhere around Harry's 13th birthday and had never been removed. The Cullens are fine, Harry said. Carlisle runs a principled household. The girl will be turned not immediately, but it's decided she's just waiting for everyone around her to catch up to her decision. The exposure risk is contained and will remain contained. Nothing needs to happen except time. Arrow had set the book down. He was looking at Harry with those ancient red eyes and the small, real smile. And, he said. And the wolves, Harry said. Arrow's expression went to delight so quickly it was almost comical. Tell me. They have a treaty with the Cullens that's been running for generations. They're shapeshifters, wolf form, but people with full consciousness in both states. Old magic. Very old, he paused. They could feel what I was and I could feel what they were, and one of them came out of the trees and we, he considered the word, introduced ourselves. Introduced, Arrow said, savoring it. It was brief. And the magic recognized them. Yes, Arrow sat back. He had the look he got when something had exceeded even his considerable expectations, the 3,000-year-old look of someone who has found again that the world is larger than the last catalog he made of it. Marcus will want to hear about this tomorrow, Arrow said. He has a theory about shapeshifter bonding and proximity magic that he's been developing for 60 years and has never had sufficient data for. He can have my account. He'll be pleased, Arrow paused, which means he'll be slightly less monosyllabic than usual, we'll all notice. Caius wants a full report first. Yes, he already sent me a note about it. The note was 4 lines long and contained the phrase at dawn, not at his convenience. You should plan for dawn. I planned for dawn before I left Washington, Harry said. Arrow looked at him. Of course you did. He leaned forward again, his elbows on the desk, in the posture he used when something was genuine and close rather than formal. How was it, truly? Harry thought about Edward looking at him from across the room, trying to read a silence that wasn't there. Bella on the stairs with her assessing eyes. Emmett asking about the magic with the uncomplicated wonder of someone who had decided to be interested in the world and never revised the decision. Jane on the drive home looking at the rain saying things she didn't call feelings but were. Good, Harry said. It was good, he paused. Complicated, interesting, worth doing. The Cullens, Arrow said carefully. What did you make of them? They're genuine, Harry said. The vegetarian thing, the family structure, it's not performance. Marcus was right, the bonds are real, they've built something. He looked at the desk. It's different from what we've built here, but it's not lesser. He held Arrow's gaze. I don't think we should be their enemies. Arrow was quiet for a moment. No, he said. Neither do I, he said it with the weight of a thought he'd been carrying for some time and had just put down somewhere it could stay. Though Caius will need convincing. Caius always needs convincing, Harry said. He comes around. He came around on you, Arrow agreed. Eventually. It took 3 years and an incident with a Romanian diplomat. You were very small and very undeniable, Arrow said. The combination is hard to resist. I'm not small anymore. No, Arrow said, and looked at him with those ancient eyes that had looked at kings and centuries and the long accumulation of everything the world had made and discarded and remade. You are not, he paused. You're also not a child anymore, which I am cognitively aware of, and emotionally, he paused. Resistant to, Harry offered. Processing, Arrow said with dignity. Harry looked at the candles on the desk. 3 of them, the same 3 that were always on Arrow's desk, burning steadily. The magic in his chest was quiet and warm, and the study was warm, and the city outside was gold, and it was past midnight in Volterra, Italy. And he had been here for 10 years, and he would be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the thought of that did not sit in him as a constraint or a weight, but as something more like an anchor, the good kind. The kind that means you're in the right place rather than the kind that means you can't move. I'm going to sleep, Harry said. Yes, Arrow said, you should. Harry stood and stretched, and the magic shifted with him, comfortable and large, and he looked at Arrow, ancient, strange, genuine, infuriating, 3,000 years old and counting, and felt the full uncomplicated fact of it, that this person was his, and he was this person's, and that was not a weakness and had never been one. Good night, Arrow, he said. Good night, Harry, Arrow said, and returned to his books, and the study was warm behind Harry as he walked out into the corridor. And the castle was quiet, and somewhere Caius was awake planning a dawn meeting with 4 lines of written expectations. And Marcus was sitting in his room with his ancient gray eyes and his 60-year theory about shapeshifter magic that was about to get its first real data, and Jane was home in her own quarters already. And Alec was somewhere reading something he'd want to discuss in the morning, and the guard moved through the halls with their old familiar rhythms, and the city on the hill was gold and ancient and entirely itself. Harry walked through the corridors without a light because he didn't need one, because the magic moved ahead of him like something that had been doing this for years and had learned the shape of home. He had. He turned off the last corridor, and the door to his rooms opened before his hand reached it. The magic easy and unhurried, and the room inside was warm. And outside the window Volterra stretched in all its amber gold. The same city that had been here when he arrived on his hands and knees at 7 years old with no destination and too much fire in his chest to contain. He sat on the windowsill and looked at it. The fire in him burned steady and warm and entirely his own, and the city looked back, and the night was very long and very full, and Harry Potter, Volturi prince, wizard, 17 years old and ancient in the ways that mattered, let it all rest exactly where it was, and was, for the 10,000th time and counting, exactly where he was supposed to be.